All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen here, and we are going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Pressley Buurma, and this topic is getting started with goats. Now we're going to go through and talk about how to define your operation. So, why do we raise goats? Well, you can raise goats for meat, you can raise goats for milk, you can raise them for fiber, you can raise them for transportation. They utilize some feedstuffs that humans cannot. You can use them for recreation as well as just an added income. A lot of people think, oh, they're so cute and cuddly. We want to use them as pets, and people only have goats for pets. And this isn't always true. A lot of people have their goat operations as a source of income, it's their main farm income, or some people do have them as pets. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to sell goat meat? Are you going to collect goat milk and then sell it? Or when you collect the goat milk, are you going to then turn it into a useful byproduct for yourself, like cheese or soap, or sell a useful byproduct? Are you going to have a breeding program and then turn around and sell the offspring? Are you going to use them for pets or recreation? Are you going to train them for pack or harness use, or are they just going to be your cute, cuddly friends? Are you going to use them to clean up an unused area? Or are you one of the many youth livestock exhibitors who are going to be using them for fair or expedition animals? All right, next we are going to be moving on to breeds. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Trevor.
All right. Well, thanks, Presley. So, when it comes to breeds of goats, there are several things to keep in mind, and maybe you already have these breeds on your farm or are looking at purchasing them, or maybe you're just starting out trying to figure out what breed I would like to have at home. And so, we'll talk about meat goat breeds first, and then we'll talk about some dairy breeds as we go along. So, meat breeds, kind of the most common one that we see around will be the boar, originated from South Africa. It is the most common meat breed. They are known for their early maturity, predominantly that white with red head, but anymore we do see a lot of solid reds, blacks, and those dapple colors in existence, and those could all be purebred. These could also be commercial. And so the mature buck weighs between 240 and 300 pounds. The mature doe is going to be somewhere between 200 and 225 per breed standard. These goats do gain about a little bit less than a half a pound a day, at least. And so you're looking at that 0.44 pounds per day in a feedlot. So what we're considering on heavy feed conditions, if we're just looking to feed those out, whether they be for market or for exhibition potentially. And these do have a non-determinate breeding season, so making that 3 kittings every 2 years possible. And so um, you may experience a breeding season that during certain months they may be harder to breed, but for the most part, those boars, you can get those 3 kittings every 2 years if you wanted to. Next meat goat breed would be the Spanish, naturally originating from Spain. These are brush type goats native to the US. They were descendants of what were thought to be escaped or released early Spanish exploring settlers would have brought these. Utilized for meat, fat content is much less than that of beef, and you commonly see that Spanish boar influence with another breed that we'll talk about here, that being the Kiko. So the Kiko originated in New Zealand, was developed from feral does with the Nubian Saanen and Toggenburg bucks. So these would be dairy breeds. These are relatively small goats in terms of frame that would have escaped domestic goats in that New Zealand area. Does weighing 25 and 55 pounds, bucks usually less than 88 pounds, so much smaller in stature. These are capable of high levels of meat production, and that's in terms of why they're still sought for to be a cross in that boar Spanish type mix, and they can produce a well variety under several conditions.
Okay, so we are going to move on to discussing a few dairy breeds. The first one is the Nubian. They stand about 30 inches tall and weigh about 135 pounds for the does, the bucks being slightly bigger, stand about 32 inches tall and weigh about 170 pounds. They have very distinct head characteristics as their eyes and muzzles are strongly convexed and they have a Roman nose. If you're not sure what a Roman nose is, it's shown here in the picture, but as you're coming down the bridge of the nose, it actually sticks out some. And we'll talk about the different types or characterizations of the noses as we go through these dairy breeds. They also have pendulous ears with rounded tips. They are the only dairy breed who has these, and they can be any color or pattern with short, fine, glossy hair, and they're known for their high butter fat and protein in their milk. Next is the Alpine. They did originate in the French Alps. The does stand about 30 inches tall and weigh about 135 pounds, whereas the bucks stand about 32 inches tall and weigh about 170 pounds. They have erect ears, as you can see here in the picture. They come in a variety of colors and patterns. Their hair is medium to short in length, and they have a straight bridge of their nose. They're known for being hardy and adaptable, and they are excellent when it comes to milk production. The next breed is the La Mancha. The does stand about 28 inches tall and weigh about 130 pounds, and the bucks stand 30 inches tall and weigh about 160 pounds. They can come in any color or color combination. They have very short, fine, and glossy hair. They have a straight bridge to their nose and short ears. When it comes to their ears, does ears cannot be any longer than about 2 inches, whereas bucks can be no longer than about an inch. They produce very well in a variety of climates and conditions, and they're known for their excellent milk production and their calm nature. Next is the Saanen, which originated in Switzerland. The does stand about 30 inches tall and weigh about 135 pounds, whereas the bucks stand about 32 inches tall and weigh 170 pounds. They are solid white to cream in color. They have erect ears and a straight or dished bridge of nose. When we're talking about the dished bridge of nose, it's almost opposite of the Roman, whereas with the Roman nose, it kind of sticks out as you come down the muscle, and with a dished bridge of nose, it'll actually start to sink in. Saanens are the favorite in commercial dairies because they have a very calm temperament, as well as they are able to produce high amounts of milk. Next is the Toggenburg, which originated in Switzerland. Does stand about 26 inches tall and weigh about 120 pounds, whereas the bucks stand 28 inches tall and weigh about 150 pounds. They have solid hair color ranging from fawn to chocolate with white or cream markings. They have erect ears that carry forward, straight or dished bridge of their nose, and they are among the first purebred dairy goats to be brought into the United States and registered. Toggenburgs make excellent milkers as well, and they're known for their milk production and temperament. When it comes to the Oberhausen, also originated in Switzerland, does stand about 28 inches tall and weigh 120 pounds. Bucks stand about 30 inches tall and weigh 150 pounds. They are going to be bay color with black markings. This is one of the few dairy breeds where you are going to have one color pattern. It's bay with black markings. Does can, however, be all black at times, but most often you will see them as bay with black markings. They have short erect ears, straight or dished bridge of their nose, and they are known for being calm in nature as well as producing higher milk fat. The sable, closely related to the Saanen that we discussed earlier, also originated in Switzerland. Does are about 30 inches tall and weigh 135 pounds. Bucks are 32 inches tall and weigh 170 pounds. They can be any color except for solid white or solid cream. And if you remember, solid white or solid cream are the only two color patterns allowed for Saanens. They have short hair with erect ears. straight or dished bridge of the nose, and they're going to have about the same milk production and calm temperament as a Saanen. And now I'll turn it over to Trevor.
All right, so now we'll get into some of the multi-purpose breeds. And so the first one being the Nigerian dwarf. These did originate in West Africa. And so does would be 17 to 22.5 inches tall, bucks 17 to 23.5 inches. They do average about 75 pounds. They have many color combinations, mostly straight or dished bridge of nose, mostly short hair. They are kind of referred to as more of a miniature goat, high milk production for their size and high butterfat component. Uh, can also be used as a pet or for recreation. And they can also be used for meat. And so we have that milk, pet, and meat use there for being multi-purpose. Another one, the pygmy, pretty common around. And so the full coat of straight, medium long hair, all colors are acceptable with the pygmy breed. They did originate out of Africa. Their muzzle, forehead, eyes, and ears are accented usually with tones that are lighter than the dark portion of the body. Bucks should have long flowing beards, and they do make good pets. Another multi-purpose breed would be the Mytonic. And so these did originate in the United States. The Mytonic or Tennessee fainting goats. These are the ones that would lock up or get stiff and faint in a few seconds when frightened. There are two strains of the Mytonic breed, one in Tennessee and one in the eastern United States, and the other in Texas. So one eastern U.S., one in Texas. They are heavy rump, deep chested, used for meat, pet, or recreation, and multiple colors. And the animals are not uncommon. Most common is the black and white common. They are a seasonal breeder and compatibility to produce 2 kittings a year as well. And then for mohair production, so this would be for the actual hair, so the Angora, an Asian minor descent. Both sexes are horned here. Bucks are pronounced spiral, and the ears are heavy and drooping. Bucks are 180 to 225 pounds after 5 years. Does would be 70 to 110 pounds. They do utilize the mohair for production and other byproducts. That is white in color. They produce about 12 pounds of hair per year. Extremely adaptable breed known for their grazing abilities.
All right, so now we are going to get into the production section of the presentation here today. And first, we're going to talk about reproduction. As we go through production here today, you'll see that some of the topics might be covered just very quickly, only 1 or 2 slides about them. And that's because we will have more in-depth presentations throughout the entire series. And one of them is reproduction. So with reproduction, the gestation length is around 150 days. Now, you do want to keep in mind that this is dependent on the breed and the size of the goat. So when you think about a miniature goat, they are going to have a shorter gestation period than some of our bigger goats, as well as depending on the breed, they could have slightly shorter or longer gestation lengths. When we're talking about the estrus cycle, this is going to be the time between the estrus cycle with a U, which is when the animals are in heat. So the estrus cycle is around 21 days. Again, it can be dependent on the breed of the goat. And the estrus cycle, or when the goats are in heat, heat will last about 36 hours. Again, dependent upon the breed. And for your operation to be profitable, if you're looking at an operation that's going to breed and sell for the offspring, whether you're using it for meat or dairy, you must kid about once a year in order to be profitable within your operation. When we're looking at pasture and grazing, we really want to look at what is best for our operation. Are we going to release the goats out on pasture? And that is their full source of feed. We're not giving any grain, we're not supplementing with hay. They'll get that and maybe a few other minor supplements, but their main source of nutrients is going to be on pasture. Or Are you releasing them out to pasture a couple hours of the day, but the sole source of their nutrients is going to be coming from grain or hay? Or do you have some pasture land and you decide that you want to bale it and feed it to your goats as hay instead of allowing them on pasture? These are all things you need to consider when you're thinking about what you're going to use your pasture for and how you're going to seed it. When you go to seed it, you want to make sure to plan for your nutrients. If you are using your pasture solely as their main source of nutrition, you want to make sure that what you are seeding with, the forages that you are using, is going to be compatible with the nutrients that they need. You also want to look at, do you have enough ground to use a rotational grazing system? Rotational grazing systems are the most encouraged as they can help control internal parasites, as well as allow you to keep fresh pasture during your entire grazing season for these animals. You can supplement grazing in stubble fields, corn fodder, wheat pastures, or winter rye. And when you're thinking about pasture and grazing, we need to remember that we do live in Ohio, we have winter time, and oftentimes we aren't able to leave our goats out in the pasture year round. So sometimes we do have to supplement with hay or grain. When we're looking at how much space is required for your goats, this is from the University of Florida Extension, and it mainly focuses on does in maintenance, so they are not lactating and they are not pregnant. But this is just kind of a general overview of kind of the averages or what to think about when you're looking at your space requirements for your goats. Rule of thumb is you need about an acre for every 1 to 3 goats, and this is in order to allow that acre of forage or pasture to produce 70% of your herd's forage that is needed. Now, when you're looking at your pasture, there are some things you need to consider, along with, can you have them out year round? But also, what is your soil like? What forages are you able to grow in your area? What is the length of the forage growth that you want to implement in your pasture? And what is the yield that you might get off of those forages? All of that can adjust how much pasture or how many acres you would need to produce 70% of your herd's forage. Down at the bottom of this graphic here, you can see the space requirements for does when you're in a barn, an activity area, and a feed rack as well. When we're looking at nutrition, it's going to first depend, how are you going to feed? Are they grazing? Are you going to be giving them hay and grain? Are you doing a combination of all of it? What is your desired feeding method? As well as, will they have access to fresh, clean water at all times? Water is the most important nutrient, and in order for the goats to thrive and live their best lives, and you have the best operation that you can, you want to make sure that you have fresh, clean water to your animals at all times. When you're looking at the breakdown of the actual requirements that you'll need, this will vary heavily depending on what breed it is, what you are using the animal for. Are you using it for milk? Are you using it for meat? Is it going to be pregnant? Is it a kid that you're raising either for milk or meat? And what environment are you in? So a few things that should be considered are the proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals. This snapshot here is from the national requirements, the nutrition requirements of small ruminants from the National Research Council. And it shows a average breakdown for mature does on the top, as well as for growing kids on the bottom chart. So if we just kind of look here, we can see that the percent crude protein, which is the percent CP in the third column, it's going to change depending on what stage that doe is in. For example, if it's in maintenance, it does not have a higher percent crude protein requirement as it would if it's in gestation or lactation. When we look at the bottom chart here for the selected groups of growing kids, we can see that it's broken down even further. They're not just growing kids, but they're dairy doelings, boar doelings, intact dairy males, and intact boar males. And since they are kids, they are all going to be in their gaining process. So you want to make sure to be feeding them enough percent crude protein and enough nutrients to be able to allow them to grow to their full potential. And you also want to make sure you are feeding enough based on what you are going to use those kids for. So Boer goats being used for meat are going to need a higher percent crude protein than dairy doelings and castrates who are just starting to grow and might not need all those nutrients at the current time.
All right, so fencing can be somewhat of a challenging topic when it comes to goats, and so a lot of this will depend on your type of operation. And so you notice three different types of fencing here, illustrating three different ways to approach this. And so maybe you already have livestock that has some barbed wire or some high tensile or single wire fencing. You could maybe add to that. Notice that the strands are very close together at the bottom. This is not only to keep the goats in, but also to keep predators out. And so we do have to keep in mind predators depending on where we might live. Another option here is the different woven wire fences or high tensile fences on the top picture. And then the bottom picture, notice there are yellow insulators there, electric fence. And so some producers will do this to help keep the goats in and help them from to prevent them from sticking their head through the fence, which can be a trouble down the road as well. From a herd health standpoint, we could have entire couple of sessions on herd health, but we will touch on just a couple of things here. And so Fanta scoring can be very helpful when it comes to herd health. So really what we're looking at here is deworming and the need to deworm. And so when we think about deworming, we do want to rotate those products because that will increase the efficacy of those. Goats are known for a little bit of resistance between products. And so we want to make sure we rotate those. As far as hoof trimming, we do need to trim feet on goats every 6 to 8 weeks or as needed. And some breeds, they can be prone to foot rot more than others. Again, how we manage those goats, if we can keep them out on pasture, that can also help us as well. From a vaccination standpoint, we do still want to vaccinate our animals from potential concerns. So usually across Clostridium preferens C, and then a tetanus C, D, and T, and then potentially following that tetanus C, D, and T up annually or at time of kidding with those does as well. With our goat herd, we do want to establish a good VCPR or veterinary client-patient relationship. Have a vet on hand to be able to work with just in case we would run into some problems and or needing those vaccines along the way. Another thing with our goats, we do want to have a goat herd health calendar. This will be based on production system. There's some good resources out there at other extension sites, or we'd be happy to provide those for you. The Fanta scoring that I mentioned earlier, this is really looking at anemia, looking at the color of the eye. And so you can see on the right side here on our Fanta score, all the way at the top, this is optimal. No worming necessary needed, as to where all the way down at the bottom, we see dangerous and fatal. And so we see that paleness correlating potentially to needing that treatment immediately and potentially a high load of worms within that animal system. And then somewhere in between, that Fanta scoring can definitely be important, looking at the eyelids of those goats throughout the season and making sure that we're keeping up on that parasite load. So next, we'll talk about our costs. And so when we look at our costs, we have a couple different budgets over the next couple slides. But when we think about the price per goats, and so we have a marker report here to correlate to our next production budget. For example, here we had 40 to 49 pound goats, average 42 pounds, $1.30 to $1.40. And so this market does fluctuate, but this would be for kids in that 42 pound range with average dressing percent. We could look at does and there were 3 head at this particular market, averaged 180 to $200, excuse me. And then on the other side, per hundredweight, looking at $160 per hundredweight. So the goat market definitely is going to look a lot different, whether you're looking at dairy does or meat does or dairy market or dairy kids at finishing or that meat goat traditional meat, maybe boar cross type breed. Those markets will look a little bit different based on demand. These can also look different throughout the seasons. And so with our goats, we do see somewhat of following different calendars and marketing, some things to consider there. So we've got a couple of budgets. You can also look at these budgets on several different websites. So on ohioline.osu.edu, we have a goat production fact sheet and budget on there. Surrounding states, Penn State, University of Kentucky also has other things there to consider. And so with this, we do want to look at our receipts. So depending on our operation structure, we may have does that we're breeding each year to sell off the kids. We would keep a percent of those and then sell those. We would want to be reasonable in our thoughts when we look at budgets. For this example, we're looking at 3 kid crops every 2 years for 25 does and 1 buck. And then with any budget that we set out, we would have total receipts, potentially selling a couple of does or a buck every couple of years. We do have feed costs, potentially pasture and mineral cost, depending if we own our own pasture, if we have our own buildings, or if we need to rent those. Some sort of feed for the does, pasture, again, minerals, supplements. Once we add up our total feed costs, we have some sort of health program. Maybe we need to market our animals, so we have some sort of marketing fee, or depending on how we're selling those, potentially some utilities and water and electric for our building or whatever that structure might be, some other operating costs. And then we get into our fixed costs. So are we planning to pay ourselves for this enterprise, or are we planning to do it because we like to do it? That can depend on what we would like to get out of that. Maybe some costs for replacement does or bucks, maybe other breeding stock that is kept or purchased. Can also fit into a couple different categories here. Equipment, how much of that equipment are we charging to the goat enterprise? Or maybe we have other enterprises on the farm. Again, this goes to our different management and buildings. And so there's a couple ways we can look at this, but just to get us a base idea, incorporating all these expenses and receipts. Another budget that looks a little bit differently at this from Cornell. This is a little bit dated, but still like to show this because you notice some variations here. So you have good conception rate, which we do need to factor that in. That yearling size, mature doe size, these can all be important. And then working down through, do we potentially lose some kids or some does, factoring that into the piece. And then you notice here, this budget does a nice job of looking at does per acre. And so that can be definitely important in these budgets. So just keep all these things in mind. How many does can I fit, or how many goats can I fit on X number of acres? Here again, that will depend on our management practice. So next we'll touch on meat. And so at the end of the day, goats can be a meat product as well as that milk product. And so here's a picture of the wholesale cuts of Siobhan, and Siobhan is what goat meat is called. Much like many other animals, we can have similar called cuts. So we'd have the arm chop, the foreshank, that breast, the rolled shoulder, blade chop, rib roast chop, loin roast, a leg sirloin, a rolled leg, and then stewed cubed. So we see that those different regions of the animal, looking at what would have been the front of the animal to the left, that meat product to the right, being that leg or that hind quarter, if you will. Some nutrient composition of goat to compare. And so this is where goat gains a lot of popularity with a lot of folks. So calories. So you notice that goats substantially less calories even compared to chicken at 122 versus 162 calories per 3-ounce cooked portion. Fat content much less at 2.6 compared to the next comparable at 6 of chicken. Beef, pork, and lamb higher in these categories as well. Our saturated fats much less, again. Protein 23, so comparable to those 24 and 25 of the other products. And then cholesterol as well, being lower. So a lot of health benefits potentially to goat meat, and this is according to that Alabama and Auburn University research. So are goats inspected? So are goats federally inspected? And they are. They are under the Federal Meat Inspection Act of 1906, much like our hogs, sheep, and cattle would be. Goats at a much less number, but they are federally inspected over the years. Actually, in 2022, there were right at 1.2 million goats that were harvested for that meat production. Notice that number not quite double what it would have been in 2010. And notice that over the years, that number did grow very rapidly from back in 1984 at 107,000 that would have been federally inspected up to the early 2000s at that 400,000 and 500,000 mark. So goats definitely growing popular in the United States.
Next, we're going to go on talking about milk specifically. And when we're looking at a milk comparison, we like to compare it to cow milk, as for us, that's often what we drink. Is we go to the store, we buy a gallon of milk, it's going to be from a cow. We can also compare it to human milk. So when we're looking at the protein percent, for goats, comparing it to cows, it's very compatible. And when we're looking at the fat percent, it's going to be slightly higher than cow's milk at a 3.8% fat, where a cow only sits about 3.6. And with the calories, again, very comparable at about 70, whereas a cow sits about 69. And then as we look down, we'll start to see where goat milk starts to stick out. So when we look at the vitamin A components in goat milk, it has significantly higher vitamin A, as it's about a 39, whereas cow milk only sits about a 21. When we look at vitamin B1 and thiamine, it sits about a 68, where cow is only about a 45. With riboflavin, we'll see a 2010, again, significantly more. Vitamin C, we are with cow milk at a 2. Vitamin D, again, very similar at a 0.7. Calcium percent, we're at a 0.19, similar to cow at a 0.18. With your iron percent, we're at a 0.07, similar to cow at a 0.06. Your phosphorus percent, we are a little higher than cow at a 0.27%, whereas cow is around a 0.23. And with cholesterol, we are much less at only about 12 milligrams per 100 mil, where cows sit about a 15. And when we break that down even more and look at the breed specifics, we can see the pounds on average that each breed produces, as well as the milk fat percent and the milk protein percent. So when we're talking about an Alpine, they produce on average about 2,700 pounds of milk. Their milk fat sits about a 3.3%, whereas their milk protein sits about a 2.9%. And as you're looking down these numbers, Alpines sit pretty comparable to the rest of them, except for two stand out when you're looking at the milk fat percent and the milk protein percent. And that would be the Nigerian dwarf and the Nubian. The Nigerian dwarf, if you remember, is a miniature breed, so it is going to have smaller breed statistics, which in turn is going to allow for smaller or less milk production on average. However, almost 800 pounds is still very significant when you look at the smaller in stature breeds. It does, however, have a much higher milk fat percent at 6.4 and a much higher milk protein percent as 4.4. Now, when we come and look at the Nubians, they, although are not producing as much on average as the Alpines, do have a higher milk fat percent at 3.7 and a semi-higher milk protein percent at, 4.9, and a higher milk protein percent at 3.8. So So this chart here from Michigan State University Extension kind of breaks down the goat milk qualities into a nice comparison chart when you're comparing it with other milk products. So goat's milk is going to have more protein per serving than cow's milk or any plant-based product. So this would be like an almond milk or an oat milk. It's also more easily digestible and better tolerated by those that are lactose intolerant. This is because goat's milk has different beta caseins than cow's milk does. It can also reduce blood cholesterol, and although it does have more calories, this can be good for some people as they might want to add weight gain. The last thing we're going to touch on tonight is selection. And selection is really going to depend on, again, what are you using your animal for? Is it going to be a meat animal, a breeding animal, show stock? Is it a buck? Is it a doe? Are you looking at a kid? Or are you going to be using it strictly for milking? And if you want to really dive into selection, our next session on March 25th is going to be about live animal evaluation and selecting the right goat for your operation. So I'm going to dive in slightly to selection here, just very basic, cover the more basics here. But again, feel free to join March 25th and we'll dive more in depth into selection. But if you're looking at a meat animal or you're taking it to market or you're even going to show it in a market class, the number one thing you want to look at is muscling. Meat equals muscling. And when you're looking at a market animal, what is it going to be used for? It's going to be used for its meat. So you definitely want to look at its muscling. You can also look at the conformation, general appearance, and growth potential. When you're looking at a dairy goat or a doe or just breeding stock in general, you want to look at their conformation. These are the genetics that are going to be passed down as you breed them. So you want to make sure that they have good conformation, a good general appearance, as you want to make sure that the offspring have these as well. You also want to look at the body capacity, and this is going to be how much room do they have to hold their kids while they are going through the gestation periods. You also want to look at the udders and mammary system. This is going to be most important in dairy animals if you are milking them, but also very important when it comes to meat animals in a breeding operation, as those does still need to be able to produce milk and feed their youngs. Some important resources for you guys for a successful livestock production is other livestock producers. Veterinarians are a big one. Trevor had talked about getting a good veterinary client-patient relationship, and this is very important for having a healthy and successful livestock herd. You can also talk to livestock market professionals, agribusiness suppliers. Us over here at OSU Extension, we're happy to help, or any other extension educators, as well as the American Dairy Goat Association or the Ohio Dairy Goat Association is going to be great resources if you have any dairy questions. And then the American Boar Goat Association is going to be great if you have any boar goat questions.